Okay, good evening, everyone. We are about to start. Can I just get a thumbs up or an emoji if you can hear me from anyone? Wonderful. Okay, that's great. Okay, we're just letting a few more people into the Zoom training. So we'll be starting in just maybe 1 or 2 minutes. Thank you to all of you who have been prompt in logging on. So we're about to start in the next 2 minutes. Thank you. Maybe as we're waiting for those 2 minutes, you might just want to drop in the chat box where you are tuned in from. Okay. All right, so just drop in the chat box where you're logged in from. We're going to start very soon. I can see a few more people in the waiting room. So let's just wait for those few more people to join, and then we will start. Okay, so welcome and good evening to everyone online this evening for the Africa Dyslexia Organisation Online Academy. So I'd like to welcome all the participants for this flagship training of the year. My name is Samantha Barrett-Acquah, and I'll be moderating the session this evening. So the topic for this evening's training is Understanding Neurodiversity, Practical Tools for Mission-Driven Teams. And I'm really looking forward to and excited about this training. I hope you are too. So before we start, I want to just give a brief introduction of Africa Dyslexia Organisation. So ADO is a Pan-African organisation working to ensure that people with dyslexia and related learning differences are not excluded from education, employment, or leadership opportunities. Now, our work sits at the intersection of education systems, workplaces, and policy. So we focus on early identification, capacity building for educators and organizations, advocacy, research, and public awareness. Now, at ADO, we recognize that learning differences are not only an education issue. When unsupported, they affect career pathways, workforce participation, and leadership. So our work is about creating systems that recognize and support people who learn differently across the lifespan. Now, before we start this training, I just want to share some housekeeping. So the session is being recorded and it will be shared with all participants after the training. There'll be an opportunity for you to post questions in the chat throughout the training, and then we'll be able to maybe address some of them at the end, and then our facilitator may be able to address some of them as he's going through the training. Then we also have a live Q&A that's going to be held at the end, and then you'll have the opportunity to unmute and ask questions. Now, we also have sign language interpretation available throughout the session. So you'll see Martin will provide the sign language interpretation for the main training session, and then Josiah will provide sign language interpretation during the live Q&A segment. All right, so let's begin, and I'll introduce our amazing facilitator taking on this training this evening. So Nathaniel Nat Hawley, MSc, is a UK-based neurodiversity consultant and founder of Divergent Thinking. Now, he helps organizations design practical, evidence-informed approaches to inclusion across hiring, leadership, and everyday work. Nat has delivered over 350 programs across corporate, public, and non-profit sectors. And his TED Talk advocates moving beyond deficit-focused narratives to unlock the value of different minds. So he blends applied neuroscience with lived experience. He translates research into simple tools managers and teams actually use, from adjustment menus and conversation scripts to bias-resistant hiring practices. He also supports grassroots and international initiatives to widen access to assessment, education, and employment for neurodivergent people. So I have the pleasure of welcoming Nathaniel. Please, you can take over. Thank you, Nat.
All right, nice. Lovely stuff. Thanks, Samantha. I really appreciate it. And lovely intro. Normally they're like, here's Nat. And I was like, that's fine. So this is nice. Pleasure to be here, everyone. And hope you don't mind my British accent. If I do say anything odd, just let me know and I'll try and convert it into everyday language. It's also great to have a sign language today. Honestly, it's really great to see. Now, in the chat, no one replied to my message. Where is everyone? I would love to know where in the world you are. It just, makes it interesting. I'm just outside of London at the moment. But as we said, today we are going to be looking about neurodiversity. What is it? Why is it? And how can we use it within our teams? So also, please do feel free to share what it is that you do. Now, to tell you a bit about myself, I am neurodivergent, so I have dyslexia, dyspraxia, and autism. And I also have a master's in neuroscience. So I like to combine lived experience, professional experience, and smudge them together. And that's hopefully what we're going to do today. Oh, Samantha's from Accra. Oh, Accra. I've actually been there. Lovely place. Yeah, I'd be curious to know where other people have gone. Across the African continent, I've been to Ghana, Tanzania, Kenya, and beautiful from what I've seen, but I appreciate there's so much more to see. Anyway, without further delay, let's get right to it. Okay, nice. I can still see everyone. I just want to make sure I can still see the chat. Okay, brilliant. Okay, I'm all set up my side now. Thanks everyone for sharing. All right, where we got? We got Nigeria, lovely stuff. Ghana, brilliant. Ghana, Nigeria again. Oh, Uganda, nice, Ivan. Great to have you. What of all places do we have? Oh, Madagascar, nice, Sarah. Never been to Madagascar, always wanted to. Oh, South Africa, nice. Cameroon. All right, really, we got a really good group of individuals today. So yeah, as I said, we are looking at understanding neurodiversity, practical tools for mission-driven teams. Heads up, this session is going to be quite interactive. So make sure you have your phones available if you are currently on your computer. If you are watching on your phone, don't worry too much, but there is going to be something where you can engage with me. It would also be lovely to know, apart from just where you are in the world, what is it that you do for a job? Why are you attending today? All of this will help give me some great context to really tailor it. Now, we've already had a lovely introduction, but just for credibility reasons, here's a picture of me in a lovely suit for my TEDx. Not that long ago, I did a talk on understanding neurodiversity, appreciating that diagnostic labels are useful to a point, but actually understanding the person has far more value in it. I've also done TV shows for like the BBC in the UK, as well as other channels, helping to promote the idea that brains think different, and actually that's okay. Oh, nice. I'm a teacher at a senior high school. Brilliant. Anyone else? Now, if we are successful, and I plan to be today, we're going to be understanding why neurodiversity and neuroinclusion even matters. We are going to be defining it, but hopefully going way beyond that. We're going to be looking at high impact, low cost actions. I appreciate money's tight no matter where you are. And sometimes people think that being inclusive is going to cost millions. A lot of the time, it can be completely free. We're going to look at different adjustments that anyone can implement. We're also going to be learning a bit about universal design, that something that benefits one person probably is going to benefit someone else. And then we're hopefully going to have a nice Q&A, and as we are going to have the sign language. Okay, nice. We've got a teacher, educator, trainer, dyslexic advocate. Perfect. Educator and counselor. Nice. Okay, we've got lots of teachers, so super relevant. Special education teacher. Great. I really do encourage you all to ask as many questions as you possibly can. I genuinely love sharing knowledge, so more the merrier. Great. Oh, Esther, ADHD coach. Perfect. Now, this is where things get interesting. If you are able to, what I want you to do is get your phones, if you're watching on your laptop, and take a picture of the QR code, and this will allow you to interact on some games with me today. As I said, if you are already on your phone watching this, I wouldn't bother because it gets a little bit fiddly. But if you're able to, do sign on. You can also go to www.menti.com and type in the code 69354726, and that will allow you to interact today. I'm going to put it in the chat, so once I leave this screen, those of you who want to join later or get a little bit jealous are able to join. And while you're doing that, let's have a look. So, oh, Joanne, neurodivergent self-advocate here from Ghana. Perfect. Oh, Zambia. Nice. Oh, Francis. Perfect. Honestly, I just love how much everyone is from all over the continent. Honestly, fantastic. Now, if you have joined successfully, I want you to hit a little heart on your screen, and that way I'll know that you've joined safely. You'll also see a little box where you can ask confidential questions. So if you have anything that you want to ask, I encourage you ask away. It could be, what's neurodiversity? Or it could be asking about supporting a student or a colleague. Anything you want to ask, now's the time to ask it. I can see we have 11 people in so far. I think we can do a bit better than that. So let's give it a few more minutes. Wester says an occupational therapy technician. Very impressive. I'm not going to lie, I can't really pronounce not everyone's name. So if I don't mention your name, please don't take it personally. I struggle to pronounce my own name, to be honest. That's why I call myself Nat. Nathaniel, quite a bit of a mouthful. Okay, nice. 16, I reckon, okay, that's fine. We will continue as we go on, but you can join at any moment. So on this one, where are you? I want you to put a little pin, if you've been able to join successfully, on the country that you are currently based. So for me, I would be in the UK, in that little island there. And I know we said we've got people from Ghana, we had Nigeria, Madagascar, South Africa. Oh, UAE. Oh, great to have you. Yes, okay, perfect. Keep them coming, do join. And if you do join a bit later, the code is still at the top. So on any interactive screen, you'll be able to join there. Does language barriers influence dyslexia? Do you know what? Interesting question. So, while dyslexia will impact you no matter what language you speak, there are some languages that there are signs that people are less likely to have dyslexia. So, when you look at the kind of Latin alphabet, um, quite a lot of individuals have dyslexia. But when you look at more picture-based languages, let's say Chinese or Japanese, there tends to be less documented individuals with dyslexia. Now, this could be because the text is more image-based, so is more conducive to how our brains work, or it might be that there's just less data. So the jury is still out, but I think there's definitely some interesting elements there. Equally, some people who speak a second language, which I imagine most of you do, you'll find that in some languages they might have quite high needs with their dyslexia, whereas in another language it may not be a problem at all or very little. So yeah, that is a really interesting question. Truthfully, more research is needed. Okay, perfect. Look at all of these. Wow, that is a good demographic right there. Oh, Cameroon. Oh, great to have you. This is perfect. So we've got all over the world, and I want to say, is that Mongolia? Actually, I daren't say in case I get it wrong. But this is a good bunch. So now let's ask the first question. I want you to share your organization or team and what it is that you do. I want to know exactly why you're here today. I noticed a lot of you are educational teachers, but I'm sure there are others as well. Oh, Hagar, did you have a question? Or maybe just put your hand up. Either way, do ask the question in the chat if you're able to. Oh, it's baking here. Sorry. Okay, now we're going. So do put in the phone, if you're able to, your organization and what it is that you do. So Elizabeth is a special educator. Bridget is a teacher from Cameroon. Juliet from Ghana is a teacher in a basic school. Helen, special educator from Ghana. Nice. And do we have another question? Yes, because here in South Africa, we have 11 official languages. Wow, I barely know English. So very impressive. But yeah, it is interesting how, our brain is split into two hemispheres, and one side tends to be better with images, and the other side is kind of more analytical. While it's not 100% 50-50 split, you do think when it comes to writing, the brain gets quite confused because on one hand, it's quite an analytical process, but on the other hand, it's very picture-based and decoding. And that is often where the confusion happens. Which age will you detect a child with dyslexia? Detect's an interesting word. It's more that, you are born dyslexia, you die dyslexic. It's who you are. You can't stop being dyslexic. However, it will often become most apparent when you are starting to learn to write because people compare you with your peers the same age as you, and they'll just think, well, they seem to be really intelligent in every other area, but they're really struggling with, say, writing their name or something along those lines, or being able to read like a basic sentence. And that's the key thing here. It's not about being smart or being dumb, not at all. It's about how it compares to your other abilities for your overall age range. Okay, I'll come back to questions again in a minute, but let's just have a look. So we've got teachers, university teachers, secondary school teachers, special education, preschool, coaches. Oh, amazing. Oh, a Ghana Lebanon Islamic school. Science teacher. Perfect. Okay, so I know my audience. I think I can work with this today. Now, my next question to ask all of you, and again, feel free to put it in the chat, put it in the app, whatever works for you. What is your biggest inclusion challenges in the workplace or your community? So, what is stopping people from having access to education or knowledge, information, anything? So I want you to think about maybe things like adjustments. So, for instance, an inclusion challenge could be not enough funding to get adjustments, maybe multiple different languages, so communication. It could be when it comes to recruiting teachers who have the correct experience or the workload. For instance, people are overworked, so being able to take additional time for different needs may become an increasing challenge. Okay. Oh, Joseph, as a computer science teacher, I'd love to know yourself. What are the challenges from making your lessons as inclusive as you possibly can? Okay, we've got understanding. Nice. Come on, expand upon that for me. Adjustments, workload, inadequate training and resources. I don't know how it is across Africa, but in the UK, a lot of teachers will only have like 1 day of training on dyslexia if you're lucky. Most of them do not. And their understanding tends to be extremely outdated. So, do you still talk about neuro differences as disorders, as deficits, or do you see them as abilities or alternative ways of seeing the world? Vocabulary is really important, and for some people, they're still kind of getting to grips with outdated language, let alone the things that we'll hopefully be talking about going forward. Ignorance about dyslexia, yeah, it's all about not being able to read and write, right? Of course not, but that's what people think. A lot of people as well do not get diagnosed, which can make it increasingly difficult to get the right support. All right, we've got, yes, Joseph says lack of comprehensive training. A lot of the time, you get really basic training, not very useful. Today, it is quite basic, but you have the opportunity to ask as many questions as you're able to. Adjusted assessments for learners. Agnes, really interesting you say that, because when we do diagnostic assessments, typically they're based on a male perspective. So females will typically go undiagnosed, or the traits that they show will not kind of correlate with their male counterparts. That's why when there are more boys that are diagnosed with, say, dyslexia or autism, opposed to young girls. Cultural bias. Yes, Helen. Unfortunately, bias is a big one. In some cultures, certain behaviors are considered normal, and the exact same behaviors could be considered abnormal in a different culture. So when we are looking at neurodivergence, which is predominantly done diagnosed via observable differences, you can see how it can be quite challenging. In the UK, if you aren't making eye contact with someone, they might think you're rude and potentially have autism. But in Japan, making eye contact with your elder could be considered rude, so you wouldn't do that anyway. So, how are you meant to diagnose someone with a condition if it varies depending on your culture? And the answer to that, I would say, is a diagnosis is more of a beginning label to approach more deeper conversations. Is the individual struggling with certain activities which seem disproportionate to their other skill sets? So, for example, someone might be really good at science, but they're struggling to read. And you think, well, they know you're an intelligent person. What's happening here? That's a good example. Whereas if someone is struggling across all their subjects, there may be something different going on. All right, cool. We got how can you different between screening and diagnosis? Well, I think, I would say focus less on diagnosis because not everyone has the privilege of being able to have access to that, and focus more on observable needs. So, regardless of if anyone has a label, they get the help. Okay, let's have a look here. We've got misinformation, superstition. Yeah. In if we're talking about autism, people used to think those with autism was supernatural, like we had witchcraft or something. Completely not true, but people still believe it. In the news not that long ago, a certain unnamed president said taking paracetamol would give you autism. Not true. So, some people said if you're looking at your computer screens too long, you'll get dyslexia. Again, not true. So we have a lot of misinformation out there, and this can create stigma, which can reduce people gaining help. All right, having the right resources and the know-how on how to effectively handle situations. Very true. Some people might have awareness in certain scenarios, but in another scenario, it just doesn't translate. I work a lot with adults, and when you look online for support around, say, dyslexia, ADHD, or others, it's always referring to children. So the support isn't very accurate at all. Okay, yeah, perfect, everyone. Yeah, you're all spot on that. Now let's do some basic definitions. Oh, Martin, do you have a question? No? Okay. Every time I see a little digital hand up, I'm like, someone wants to talk to me. No one does. That's fine. So let's do some basic definitions, okay? So neurodiversity. Now, I prefer this to oppose talking about dyslexia on its own, and I'll tell you why. So neuro means neural pathways. Our brain has lots of cables and they are all connecting from different areas. So everyone who has a brain will have neurodiversity. Diversity is just meaning everyone's different. So every single brain is completely different. It's like your fingerprint, but like even more unique. And on here, you'll see lots of different brains representing the world's population. Now, you'll see that while all brains are different, there are some brains that are more similar than others. So in this one, they're illustrated by colors. So you'll see that there are more pink brains than there are colored brains. Now, these pink brains, they aren't better, they aren't smarter, they aren't worse, they're just in the majority. And because they're in the majority, they are called neurotypical. So neurotypical, again, not better, not worse, it's just the brain type which is in the majority. In one culture, a certain type of individual might be neurotypical, but in another culture, they would be considered neurodivergent. So you'll see here that this isn't a medical term, it's more of an observational term that you would resonate yourself. Not everyone who is neurotypical will um, will have or will not have a diagnosis. So as you can see here, you've got lots of brains. Every brain is different. Some brains that think more or less similar to others are called neurotypical. I explain this like, imagine you've kind of got like a parallel line. And as long as you stay within this kind of uh, space of acceptability, you're fine. But if you kind of go out of that box and think a little bit different, you'd be called neurodivergent. So I'm neurodivergent because I think different. Now, you may think differently from other people around you, but you don't have any barriers in day-to-day life. As a result, you won't get any diagnosis. But if you think differently and you are continuously running into problems every single day, that is when you might get a diagnosis, such as dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD. And this is a really important thing that I want to get across. Just thinking differently isn't a disability. It's when the way you think is at odds with the systems and the processes that have been created. So, for example, schools are very much created for individuals who can read fluently. If you take a little bit longer to read, the school systems aren't really set up for that, and that's where the disability kicks in. And the last word I want to explain is neurodiverse. Are you neurodiverse? No, you're not. Am I neurodiverse? I am not. But are we neurodiverse? Absolutely. Neurodiverse just refers to a group. And you'll see here that while there are different types of thinkers, there are also neurotypical individuals. And ultimately, that is what we are promoting, neuro-inclusion. We're trying to create a world where every different type of brain is included, no matter how it processes information. Okay, does that make sense? Just to summarize, neurodiversity is an umbrella term. You've got a brain, brains think differently. Neurotypical, your brain thinks more or less similar to everyone else around you. Neurodivergent, you think substantially different. And neurodiverse, it is a collective group of different thinkers. Okay, let me just quickly check questions to make sure everyone's understanding. Okay, I have a student who is able to answer questions orally, but when he is to read and write, he tends to write things that do not make sense. How do we help the child? Well, first of all, I think that's a prime example of someone who is neurodivergent. They are really skilled in one area, but may struggle in another area. The way I would support that person is find out how their brain works. And you mentioned here by speaking and trying to use that as your kind of key method of either testing them or teaching them. I appreciate not all school systems have that flexibility, but if you do have the flexibility of adapting how you teach a student, you're going to get far better results. Okay, the teacher-learner ratio is quite large and can be challenging. Completely understand. If you have, say, 30 or even more students in one classroom, and you've got one or two people who think differently from the others, you're probably going to teach all the other students the way that they learn best, because the majority, unfortunately, that's where the problem kind of lies. People who think differently get less attention, and the gap between them and their other students just widen and widen and widen. And that's, unfortunately, where long-term systemic challenges stem from. Now, moving on to the next screen, I want to know about your experience. I want you to put a little dot or to share in the chat where you have the most experience. So for instance, if you primarily work with people with autism, put a little dot there or say in the chat. If you are mostly working with individuals with dyslexia, also tell me there. And while you do that, I'm going to give a quick, in a nutshell, definition of what all of these actually mean. So autism, or officially autism spectrum disorder, is simply how the brain thinks. People who have autism may struggle with verbal communication. They might struggle with social interaction. They might find things like sensory information kind of overstimulating or understimulating. Notice how I'm using a lot of deficit words here, like disorder, deficit, struggling. And that's because, unfortunately, all of these diagnostic labels are inherently deficit focused. And that's why I prefer terms like neurodivergent. But I think in the school system, it's still kind of useful to know them. Then you've got ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and that can impact people in many different ways. So they might be inattentive, where your brain is kind of internally kind of foggy. They might be hyperactive, where they are visibly showing lots of energy, or they might have combined a little bit of that, a little bit of that. You also have Tourette's and tics, where the body, or you kind of need to get things out. It's not swearing necessarily. It could be anything from moving, twitches, winking. I like to explain it as like a physical manifestation of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Not quite, but it kind of gives you that visual image. You also have global development delay, which is a relatively new label, which hasn't been around as long as the others. Well, I mentioned that a lot of these conditions are for life. With global development delay, you'll normally see that a young person might really struggle, but they will vastly improve as they get older. So where neurotypical students, they go from not knowing information to knowing information, Some students will have a bit of a different bell curve. There's also intellectual disabilities, and just because you have an intellectual disability doesn't mean you're neurodivergent. And just because you're neurodivergent doesn't mean you have an intellectual disability, though they can go together. What other ones do we have? Okay, we have the top ones here were neurodevelopmental, right? So these are ones which they are with you from the moment you are born and they impact you in every situation. Whereas specific learning differences, they are with you your entire life, but they may not impact you as significant in every single area. So, for example, dyslexia predominantly impacts you with reading, but may not impact you at all when it comes to socializing. And dyslexia is how the brain reads phonologics. So it's about if you have a word, can the brain pull it apart and draw information from it? If you can do it easily, probably don't have dyslexia. If it takes a little bit more concentration, maybe you do. Dyspraxia is really common, but less known. That is more around coordination and speaking. It's like having the words on the tip of your tongue, but not being able to quite get them out. So motor coordination. And then you've got dyscalculia and dysgraphia, not as widely known, but also really useful to know about. Dyscalculia is kind of like dyslexia for maths, but it doesn't mean you're bad at maths, but it means that the way your brain goes about solving mathematical problems might be different to those around you. And dysgraphia, often confused with dyslexia, is about writing. So if you struggle to write, that's more dysgraphia opposed to dyslexia. Oof. And these are only a few of them. There are so many more. That's why I find these are useful to a point, but beyond this, I think it's much better to just understand that different students think differently, and our approach needs to be tailored for every single one of them. I'm loving the comments, by the way. I wish I could reply to all of them. Okay, I have a child with multiple learning disabilities and ADHD. Well, interesting you mention that, Helen. The fact that these are just ways to explain different characteristics show you that you might not fit neatly into one of these boxes. You might be somewhere in between. You might remember at the beginning, I mentioned I have dyslexia, dyspraxia, and autism. That's because my brain doesn't fit neatly into a box. The way my brain thinks, it's kind of like, I struggle in this, a little bit that, I'm good at that. So different words were needed to explain my brain. Okay, nice. Oh, Nadia, dyslexia, ADHD, and dysgraphia. Oh, Grace, ADHD and dyslexia. See, we've got so many different combos. And honestly, you very rarely ever meet an individual who only has one. Because as I said, we do not fit neatly into boxes. We tend to kind of like blur different spaces. But you only ever get diagnosed for something that causes a barrier. If something isn't causing you any challenges, well, that's just a different way of thinking. It doesn't need to have a name attached to it. Okay. Oh, yes, Nadia, yeah. DLD is developmental language delay. Thank you for that. What's the difference between dysgraphia and dyspraxia? It's a good point. So dyspraxia is more gross motor skills. So, it could be kind of walking, riding a bike, doing up buttons, where dysgraphia is predominantly about writing. So dysgraphia, dyspraxia is much more broader, but great question. Though, like I said, a lot of these do overflow into each other. They don't neatly go into any category. So use these with a pinch of salt. Now, other ones that are worth noting about are like sensory processing. Though it's not an official condition, you'll find that a lot of individuals will struggle with like specific processing differences, auditory processing differences, or visual processing differences. So let's say your ear, the physical hardware, completely fine, but how the brain interprets those signals is where there may be confusion. same visual. Your eyes might be 20/20 vision, but the way that your brain interprets the information that goes through the eyes is where the challenge might come from. Then you've got things like acquired neurodivergence. I know I keep saying you're born with all of these. Sometimes you're not. This is, however, quite rare. So maybe you've had a traumatic brain injury, a stroke, epilepsy. It does change how your brain wires, and they can often, the outcome can look very similar to some of these neurodevelopmentals. Other ones that are worth noting about is mental health conditions. Being neurodivergent and having a mental health condition are not the same thing. But if you are neurodivergent, you're probably like a fish swimming upstream. You can do it, but it's tiring. And if you are continuously walking up a hill every single day, your brain is going to get tired. So a lot of us do struggle with mental health, such as obsessive compulsive disorder, bipolar, schizophrenia, anxiety, just to name a few. Long story short, the brain is complicated. There are many different ways we can kind of divide it into different kind of groups. But knowing all of these groups isn't what's going to make you a good teacher. Knowing the individual is what's going to make you a good teacher. Okay, we've got, does speech delay one of the causes of dyslexia? Not a cause, no. One of the kind of traits or characteristics. But I would say that a lot of people with autism have speech delay. So no, not particularly. But good question. All right, now let's keep going because this is interesting. I'm loving this audience. We're going to do a bit of a quiz now. And nice and simple, if you're able to, do join on with us. And you can put a name, put your real name, put a fake name, whatever works for you. And you'll have about 30 or 20 seconds to answer each question. And just a bit of fun, but I want to understand where all of you are. And if you are not able to join and you just want to use the chat, by all means, do shout out on the chat. Okay, we got 15 players here. Nice. Okay. Hope those who can join are ready. Dora, it's only 3 questions, not too difficult. And honestly, a lot of these don't have a complete right answer. They're all open to negotiation. So neurodiversity, is it a universal concept or is it a Western concept? So you can either choose universal across cultures, Western only, or universal but hidden by stigma and service gaps. Okay, nice. In the chat, I can see a few of you have said universal. I wonder if we've got any kind of other views or opinions. Interesting. So it is the third one. Now, is it universal across cultures? Yes, it is. Is it Western only? Of course not. Because remember, neurodiversity is having a brain and brains thinking differently. So, of course, it would be across any culture. However, while it is universal, not everyone has the same knowledge around it, and it is hidden by stigma and service gaps. When you look at the world as a whole, you'll see a very interesting pattern. As modern medicine, as countries become more developed, you'll see that child mortality goes down. And when it goes down, other areas go up, such as research and understanding around cognition and how the brain works. So in countries where, say, resources or medicine maybe aren't as far along as, say, Western countries, you'll notice that understanding around things like dyslexia and autism tend to be a lot lower. So absolutely, it doesn't matter where in the world you are. If your brain thinks differently, your brain thinks differently. This isn't exclusive to people from certain countries. That being said, it does mean that the likelihood of you understanding it or knowing about it might be less. But to put it better, it's not that you are less likely to know about it, it's that you're less likely to act upon it. So you may know that your students might have X, Y, Z, but you may not have the resources or the services around you to do anything about it, like a lot of you have already mentioned. Okay, thanks for that. All right, let's do number two. Okay, fingers at the ready. In a 20-person team, how many are likely to be neurodivergent? So would you say being neurodivergent is rare, uncommon, or very likely? And again, we are talking universal here. All right, Lillian says 3 to 4. Upendo says very likely. Nancy says very likely. Okay. I mean, to be honest, maybe I'm preaching to the converted today. It is, in fact, very likely. So, in a 20-person team, probably about 3 or 4 people are very likely to be neurodivergent. They say it could be anything from like 1 in 7 people think differently from the majority. So, technically, we are the minority, but not by that much. So, it's really important that as teachers, as educators, that this isn't just a niche thing that we think about once a year, but it is something that we embed into all our lessons, all our teaching material, and appreciate that this is also something that doesn't just impact children. Being neurodivergent is lifelong. Maybe even some of you are neurodivergent, and some of your colleagues may be. So we must look much broader at how do we support everyone rather than how do we support 1 or 2 individuals. To break it down a bit further, autism is about 1%, ADHD is approximately 8%, dyslexia is around 7% if you're looking at most recent estimates, and dyspraxia is about 5%. Now you'll notice that I've got the full-colored individuals and fainter colors. So the fainter ones is probably the more realistic estimate because, as I said, yes, you have people who are diagnosed, but if you come from a background, a society, or a culture where there just isn't the resources to get diagnosed, you're not going to be counted. But you absolutely would be counted if you had access to the right resources. So autism is probably more like 2%. ADHD, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it's probably around 10%. Dyslexia, also around 10%, and dyspraxia around 6%. So we have a long way to go in order for everyone to have access to support. I always say to people that in a good world, we'd all have access to diagnosis. In an amazing world, we wouldn't need to have a diagnosis, but we're not quite there yet. All right, and now let's do the last question. Oh, and what about dysgraphia? Good point. Those ones aren't diagnosed nearly as much to have reliable data, but they're probably around about like 3 or 4%. But I don't have any concrete stats to back that up just because they're underreported. Who is most likely to disclose neurodivergence? So are women and my minoritized groups more likely to disclose? Are younger employees more likely to disclose? Or are men more likely to disclose? Basically, who's most likely to talk about it? All right, we've got, okay, a lot of you are saying men, anyone else? Okay, women, younger employees. I love the debate. That's great. Oh, that's so interesting. So most of you said women and minoritized groups. Now, it isn't the answer, and let me tell you why. Because the way we diagnose people has always been done from a Western male perspective. So if you show characteristics that do not align with how boys typically present, then the likelihood of getting diagnosed goes down massively. Younger people are more likely to disclose because there's more awareness, more understanding, less stigma. And men are also much more likely to disclose for the very reason that the way we have created the diagnostic system was always kind of tailored towards how they demonstrate. A good example might be ADHD. When you look at the amount of men and women who have ADHD, men are much more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD, where women are significantly less. Now, is that because men are genetically more likely to have ADHD, or is it because when we look for ADHD characteristics, we typically look for hyperactivity, which males are more likely to demonstrate, aka maybe a boy is misbehaving in class, where a girl, rather than misbehaving, they might be more inattentive, so keep to themselves. And because of that different way of displaying difficulties in class, one gets help, one doesn't get help. One knows they have ADHD, the other one doesn't know they have ADHD. Another important reason why focusing and relying on labels honestly will only get you so far. Okay, let's see who you did. Cake, whoever you are, absolutely smashed it. A respectable second to Hanga, and Franco, a respectable 4. So thanks, everyone. Now, we're doing good. Give a little digital heart if you are still with me and understanding and following okay. Okay, perfect. The next question I get asked a lot is, okay, Nat, if we aren't focusing on labels, then, how do I know I'm neurodivergent? Well, it all comes down to what I like to call the spiky profile. If you are just bad at everything, you are not neurodivergent. To be neurodivergent, you need to have a fluctuation of ability. So, for example, you might, down long here is your skill and how good you're at it. You might struggle with speech. Now, that might be considered a disability or a boundary. However, you might have really good memory. You might really struggle with writing, but be great at auditory processing. You might struggle to meet deadlines, but be really great at collaboration. So in terms of what you're good at and what you struggle at, that can vary dramatically from person to person. But what determines if you are neurodivergent or neurotypical is about how spiky your profile tends to be. So someone who is neurotypical will more or less be pretty good at most things. They won't struggle in as many things as maybe some neurodivergent people would. However, they won't have the same high spikes or really strong skill sets. And I find in schools, we focus so much on what someone can't do, we completely forget about all the things that they can do. And that's why I love talking about spiky profile. It isn't saying we're disabled. It isn't saying we're superheroes. It's saying that we have ups and downs. They just tend to be much larger than others around us. Yes, I'm loving all the hearts, by the way. That's really nice. The emojis give me a lot of joy. Okay, so we got, am I neurodivergent? I struggle to meet deadlines, but I'm good at collaboration. Yes, you probably are. Now, in terms of like how much you diverge from the norm, who can possibly say? But if you are someone whose skill sets are incredibly diverse, so maybe you love reading, you really struggle with writing. Normally, those two skills go together. But if you find you are like quite different from one or the other, you're likely neurodivergent. Now, just for fun, I want to find out what all of you are good at. So let's say you are amazing at speaking. I want you to give yourself 5 out of 5. If you are terrible at writing, like I am, maybe you might give yourself 0 out of 5. And this is what you can do within your classes. You do not need a diagnosis in order to understand how individuals learn and where they process. So for here, what we should see is individually, you're quite spiky, but collectively, we're quite well-rounded. And that is what we really mean when we talk about neuro-inclusion. It's about appreciating that our differences individually could be seen as a negative, but as a collective, as a group, our differences make us incredibly well-rounded and really great at innovating. Like, look at this. As a group, look how round this is. And it shows you if we were all to be in the same class together or be in the same company, our company would kick ass. Like, we'd be amazing. And that's because we have such a variety of different skill sets. If, however, you start seeing like, okay, maybe social skills, we're a bit low on that, that might be where you recruit for or kind of look for pupils to kind of have a different perspective. So this is just one way that I would go about understanding your team, asking questions. Who enjoys being indoors? Who enjoys being outdoors? Who likes speaking about what they've learned? Who likes writing about what they've learned? It's just about adapting and understanding one-to-ones. Now, for the final moment, I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive on the most common neurodivergences. So let's look at dyslexia. Dyslexia, as I said, is around phonologics. It's how we read words. So the word dyslexia, it might be dyslexia. You break it into chunks. Now, for someone with dyslexia, breaking things down is incredibly difficult. For me personally, I don't read like that. I read like things are flat images. So if I've seen the image before, I can read. But if I've never seen it, I cannot read. Some examples of people with dyslexia include Whoopi Goldberg, who is an amazing actor. Lewis Hamilton is really good with hands-on activities like racing. My personal favourite, Maggie Adbrin-Pocock, is a British space scientist who struggled with academia but was really good at engineering. So dyslexia doesn't stop you from being successful, but it normally means that you have to go a different route about it or find a way of learning that works with your brain opposed to against your brain. So what I would say when it comes to dyslexia, using voice notes like WhatsApp, I always use voice notes. For me, so much easier. I'd also say using international English, particularly if you have lots of different languages. Try and avoid jargon. So as I said at the beginning, being English, I talk a lot of like what I would say gobbledygook. And I apologize for Martin, who has to translate some of my words. It just means saying things that aren't kind of common. And also allowing...
So I'm trying it.
Yeah, you're doing great, mate.
I'm trying to translate it.
You're doing a great job, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
And also just allowing people extra time. Maybe it's homework, maybe it's a report, but just appreciating this isn't because someone isn't smart. It's because the way you have given them the work isn't connecting to how their brain works. So their brain has to do additional processing. And if you do these things, you will get better outcomes. You'll get more detail. You'll keep your staff, keep your students. You'll be able to write reports that are have much more richer detail. And that's the thing here. I'm not asking you to make adjustments because it's nice. I'm saying make adjustments because it improves the equality for everyone. It just makes good sense to be inclusive. The next one is dyspraxia. And as I said, predominantly affects motion and movement, both gross motor skills and fine motor skills. People who have dyspraxia, Harry Potter, Daniel Radcliffe. Who else? I mean, you might know David Bailey is a famous photographer. So just because you have dyspraxia doesn't mean you can't do sports, but it might mean that you need a little bit more time to accomplish certain tasks. What I would say for people with dyspraxia is having visual checklists. Having dyspraxia is like having all the information, but that information being kind of stuck in a massive traffic jam. So the information comes out slowly. Giving someone a little bit more time or translating it in a different format, say more images opposed to writing, can really help free up that traffic jam. Also making sure you kind of hit things in a consistent place. I don't know if you're like me, I lose everything. And it's because my brain struggles to kind of remember. I'm so busy trying to take all this information around me that my brain forgets. So just leaving things in the same position makes a big difference. Outcomes, if you do these things, you'll find that people break less stuff. There's less accidents, increases health and safety, and people are better at planning. So again, you're not doing this because it's nice, you're doing this because it makes sense. And autism? Autism is a big subject, and we can't talk about it all today, but it can impact people in many different ways. A great example is that for some people, they struggle with sensory information. We all have preferences, right? You know, oh, it's too hot today, it's too cold, that's too smelly, I don't like the feeling of that. But for some individuals, just like that spiky profile, some things are like really smelly, really noisy, and that can cause distress. Other things, some people love parties. Other people get really drained with parties and really tired. So autism is just kind of more extremes in terms of how we absorb information. Temple Grandin is a really great example. They struggled with sensory overwhelm, but because they saw the world different, it actually led them to coming up with lots of inventions. Stephen Wiltshire is an amazing example. He struggled with verbal communication and independent living, but had a phenomenal memory and really talented with drawing. He flew over London in a helicopter, never saw the city ever in his life. Only after like an hour, he was able to draw the whole skyline from memory. Now, that's an extreme example. We don't all have these superpowers, but it does show you that while we may be seemingly lacking in some areas, we really exceed in others. And it's about seeing the whole person rather than just kind of one characteristic or one quality. So how you might support someone with autism is by allowing breaks. If someone is in a noisy environment, it does get overwhelming. Allowing people to say, you know what, I'm going to sit this one out. Sometimes being social might just be the last thing you want to do in a day. And it also could be giving people notice about what's going to happen. It can, again, reduce overwhelm. And if you do these things, people will burn out less. They will be much more effective in what they are doing, and they'll feel more psychologically safe. And what that means is that people feel more comfortable to be vulnerable and to share. And it also reduces stigma and goes a little bit to get rid of bias. So a win-win for everyone. And the very last one I want to talk about is ADHD. So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And this is how the brain processes information again. Now, as I said, ADHD can be three types. You've got inattentive, hyperactive, and combined. Most people have combined ADHD. Inattentive is a bit more rarer. Hyperactive is typically what people think of when they think of ADHD. Some great examples of individuals with ADHD is Simone Biles. Now, she is an American gymnast, I believe the most decorated in all of history. And their ADHD means they are hyper-focused on what they do best, gymnastics. They are so good at what they do. However, ADHD is it's not having more energy than others, it's having a different distribution of energy. So where someone might use like a constant bit of energy up throughout the day to get to bedtime, someone with ADHD might use all their energy up in one go. And they might be amazing within that power hour, but after that, completely drained and struggle to go on. People like Simone really was great at what they did, but people wanted that greatness 100% of the time. And as a result, it wore them down. It led to burnout. And she very publicly struggled with mental health challenges. So as I said at the beginning, being neurodivergent doesn't mean you have a mental health condition, but it does mean that you are much more likely to suffer from poor mental health because you aren't adapting your lifestyle to how your brain works. Other examples is Justin Timberlake, Emma Watson, Hermione Granger, Bill Gates, as well as other individuals you may or may not know. Again, if any of you do have any questions, please do ask in the chat or on the app, and I'll be more than happy to answer them as I go along. I appreciate this is all quick, so do stop me at any moment if you want to know a bit more. Now, the top things you could do to support individuals with ADHD, I would say write things down. Allow people to see what you're talking about. It kind of gives an anchor so the mind doesn't kind of wander off. Another thing you can do is body doubling. Now, body doubling, all it means is working with someone. So if you do a lot of independent working, you can find it's quite easy to get distracted. But sometimes just sitting next to someone or being on a video call with someone can be enough to kind of help give you, again, like an anchor. The other thing is brain dumping. If you are anything like me, I have so many ideas. A lot of them are terrible ideas, but these ideas can be really innovative. However, if someone has an agenda and I'm talking about all my ideas, it can completely throw a meeting off track. So brain dumping is saying having 10 minutes at the start of the day to get all your ideas out in one go, and then focusing on one or two ideas. If you allow someone to work with their brain rather than against their brain, you'll find you're able to get hyper-focus. You'll be able to get more consistent deliveries, maybe actually able to complete tasks. And you'll also find that they'll be very good at problem solving. So when we talk about these high spikes, they do not come for free. You have to support the bottom spikes in order to get the top spikes. And I think that's what a lot of individuals do not understand. They only see the challenges and they do not see the strengths, but they're not willing to support the challenges for the strengths to kind of emerge and come out. Okay, Amanda says, from what age can you start to find out the signs of ADHD? I mean, most commonly people are diagnosed from like 5 or 6, but honestly, it can be a lot sooner. Males tend to get diagnosed significantly younger, maybe in primary school, whereas girls tend to get diagnosed a lot later in life. You'll see a lot of women who are, 40, 50 are becoming more aware that they have ADHD. Now, the reason why is to what I said. Boys tend to misbehave when they aren't understanding something, so they get help, where girls will not say anything, and they will not say anything their entire life, and eventually it gets so heavy, like continuously fighting against the system, that they burn out, and that's why they might get help later in life. So interesting. Okay, any other questions? Oh, nice, we've got one here. How do I help a grade 4 child with dyslexia? Okay, can you tell me what age that is approximately? Because it's a bit different over here. But I'm gonna guess like kind of under 10? Okay, I'll come back to that one at the end if that's okay, just while we focus on ADHD. So now I want to open it up to as many questions as you can possibly chuck at me, and I'll do my absolute best to answer as many as I can within the time. Okay, yeah, so let's do the child with dyslexia. How do I help a grade 4 child with dyslexia to read? I would say make reading fun. I mean, that's the first thing. When people normally make us read really boring things, and then we gain this association that reading is boring, it's not very fun. I think ultimately reading is storytelling. Whenever I used to struggle with a word, I'd make up a fun word. So my story, I wouldn't read exactly what was on the page. I allowed my imagination to fill in the gaps. And rather than my teacher saying, Nathaniel, that's wrong, they would kind of allow me to just go with it. I also would say, using pictures, illustrations, if someone is struggling, allow them to take a break. Things like that can really help. But also appreciate that there may have a delay, but a delay doesn't mean that they won't be able to do it later on. Okay, 9 years. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, how do I get a child who is dyslexic and has DLD to mention the names of people around him? Okay, well, I don't know if this is the case, but there is this thing called like double empathy, which means that people don't always connect to those around them. So I guess it's about helping them understand why it's important. When I was younger, if people didn't say my name, like let's say they said Nathan instead of Nathaniel, I would not respond to them. I would not listen because for me, things were very black and white. My name is Nathaniel. If you say it, I answer. If you don't say it, I won't answer. And I wasn't able to kind of understand that, okay, maybe someone might get my name wrong, but they're still referring to me. And I think that needed explaining to. So I would say with this, simply be transparent with them, explain to them why it's important. And rather than doing it just because it's nice, saying, hey, if you want this person to listen to you, then you need to say their name. Maybe that's what you're on about. Oh, what we got here? We got another one in the chat as well. Okay, we've got using flashcards to teach them in regards to dyslexia. Flashcards can definitely work. For me personally, I remember finding them a little bit boring, and I think that's crucial, that knowing different people, different styles. We got what adjustments can I do? Let's say, what adjustments can I do to help a child who has dysgraphia at the age of 8, 9, and 10? Yet it's important for them to write, especially in classrooms, for note writing and completing class tasks. I feel this is when we have a contradiction between what the system wants and what would benefit the child. There used to be there's this process called the talk and chalk method, where the teacher would say something and the student would be expected to write it down. And teachers like doing that because they believe it helps the student understand and have better comprehension. Now, while that can be true for some, because the brain kind of makes this kind of connection between writing and kind of absorbing the information, for neurodivergent individuals who very frequently get overstimulated, so for instance, they're listening to the teacher, things are moving around, their brain is already kind of running around with thoughts, having to do one extra task of writing it down, that's not work for them. I know for myself what I do, because if I'm writing notes, I'm not listening. I can't do two things at once very well. I will have my meetings recorded. I'll use like a dictaphone or something like that. And it means that I'm putting 100% of my focus into listening to the teacher rather than trying to write at the exact same time. So I would say I get why you want them to write down, but maybe ask yourself, what's more important? Is it more important that they write it down, or is it more important that they listen to me and absorb the information the best way that they possibly can do? Okay, let's see what else ones we got. Okay, will you say a child is dyslexic if she is able to read in her mother tongue, L1, and unable to read in English, L2? Not necessarily, no. I mean, it stands, so they can read in L1 and unable to read. Well, it makes sense that they would be more fluent in their mother tongue, but not necessarily. I would, again, focus less on the label and more on how it presents itself. So in this situation, regardless of whether or not they have dyslexia, I would still give them additional support. Oh, I have a large class size. How do I detect some of these challenges amongst my learners? Really good question. It can be very difficult in a large class, and that's why I would ask the students to write down for you, or like even on, let's say, how do you learn best? You tell me. And I've done exercises where I've got everyone in the room, and I said, okay, so who here likes reading books? Who here likes watching TV? Who likes outdoors? Who likes indoors? And I try to get them running to different sizes of the class so I can visually get an idea about how different students learn best in my class. If you can turn this into a fun activity, that can be really beneficial. Another thing you can do is called a learning passport. It's where you might kind of write a template that's saying, I learn best like this. I need breaks every, gap. So you have like kind of a cheat sheet for all your students on how to best connect with them. But yeah, I fully appreciate the challenges of having a large class. Joshua, Garner, there's a boy in grade 5 who cannot read, but already good in contributing his quota in class discussions. What best tools can you help for such a learner? He easily forgets too. I mean, why does he easily forget? Maybe it's because he is stressed, he is overwhelmed. I would say if he's able to contribute orally, that's amazing. And while this might be a little bit out there, I like to work with students like they are employees. So in a company, you wouldn't expect every single employee to do the exact same thing as good as each other. You would have some people who are saying graphics, other people in marketing, and other people doing the pitching or the coding. So we have like different tables, different specialties. So in a classroom, why not treat it the same? Okay, so you're good at speaking. Why don't you do the presentation? And the person who's really good at writing, maybe they did the research. So you can kind of like change the way that you teach a class, kind of make it emulate the workplace more than a classroom, which could have its own benefit. God, everyone, so many questions, by the way. Like, I'm overwhelmed in the best way possible. How do I get my students to say the sh sound in place of the s sound in a word like fish? I mean, that's a really good one. I suppose try and make it a game. I personally really struggle. Like shoulder and soldier, I really struggled with. And honestly, I think I just listened to a lot of audiobooks, watched a lot of YouTube videos. I think trying to teach people in a way that is fun kind of helps it kind of cement itself. But equally, like I said, how people's learning curves are different. Some people will take longer to learn. And that, that's natural. So I wouldn't necessarily push it. So I don't have an exact answer for that, apart from if it's not sticking, don't try and make it stick. Move on to something else. There's this English expression. It says, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And that's what we're taught throughout our entire life, where I would say if you're neurodivergent, put all your eggs in one basket. And what that means is people want you to be good at everything, where for neurodivergent people, we are not good at everything. Allow us to do the things that we are really good at and become amazing at them. I will never be amazing at maths, but I very well could be really good at drawing. And if I focus on that one thing, maybe I might be a specialist one day. Okay, what else have we got? How do I help my student who is autistic, dyslexic, and dysgraphic to read, who is at the age of 14? That's a big question, Margaret. I would say understand how their brain works, forget about what you believe to know about these individual diagnostic labels, and focus on the individual. Do we have dyslexia, dyspraxia, and dyscalculia screening tools that teachers can use? If so, are there some? Well, there are tools online where you can do, say, a dyslexia characteristic test. I would be apprehensive to recommend them to you. I really don't think that's the best approach. I think understanding the signs and the traits that are related to, say, dyslexia or dysgraphia, and find individual strategies for different students. These screening tools are oversimplified and they teach people who aren't doctors or medical professionals to pretend that they are. So they can actually do more harm than good. So be mindful. They can be useful, these screening tools, but they also have potential for misuse. The teacher learning ratio is quite large. Okay, yeah, no, I agree that. Okay, yeah, we've answered those. I'm happy with that. And we've probably got time for a few more before we go on to the next section. How can employers support employees who have ADHD or dyslexia or autism at the workplace? I would say knowledge is power. When people think of ADHD, they think of someone who can't concentrate. When they think of dyslexia, they think of someone who cannot read. And that's not the individual's problem, that's the manager's problem. I think improving your understanding and taking more of a 50-50 approach goes a real long way. So, for example, just because you have dyslexia doesn't mean you're the expert on dyslexia, but it does mean you probably have a foundational knowledge on how your brain works. So having that conversation goes a long way. How can I best support a teacher with dyslexia and autistic students? I mean, these are quite broad questions, but I would say try and find tasks which utilize the skills which often come with dyslexia and autism. So working with the students' brains rather than against them. A lot of teaching material has been developed for neurotypical students, and unless it's adapted, it may not be that beneficial. Okay, perfect. And I just want to double make sure I've answered all of them. If I have missed any of your questions, please do repost them and I'll make sure to catch any ones that I have missed. Okay, Diwan, how do you distinguish between neurodiversity as a concept and inclusive practice in real organizational settings? Okay, let me understand. How do I distinguish between neurodiversity as a concept and inclusive practice? Okay, well, again, neurodiversity is simply understanding that people have different brains. You can understand people have different brains and do nothing about it whatsoever. Where inclusive practices, neuroinclusion, is taking that knowledge and actually doing something with that knowledge. So for me, that's the difference there. Organizations knowing neurodiversity exists, great, but organizations that utilize different ways of thinking, amazing. Oh, Salma says, I am an educator. Okay, I'll do this as my last one here, I think. I am an educator in Ghana Lebanon Islamic School, Ghana. There is a concern about how traditional assessments can be disadvantage to students with dyslexia, failing to accurately reflect their knowledge, granting them limited accommodations. How best can dyslexics be supported through assessment to reflect their knowledge satisfactorily? Great question. I would first start by looking at some of the most famous entrepreneurs and richest people on the planet. Most of them have dyslexia. Something like 40% of all self-made millionaires have dyslexia. And if you look at a lot of their stories, a lot of them dropped out of school. So you tend to find that dyslexic people are really smart, but because we have not made education work for them, they will leave. So we need to change the way we educate people and examine them to work with their brain. So, for example, can we do more collaborative tasks? Could we do more oral tasks opposed to just writing? Are there different ways to show intelligence? Are we purely marking for academics, or are we also doing for emotional intelligence? Are we giving kind of equal time and patience to the different learning styles? I also think we normally look at subjects quite individually, like maths, English, science, when the real world isn't like that. Being like in a disciplinary, so taking kind of multiple subjects and seeing how they work together has far better real world results. Now, I totally get the challenge. I don't know about your individual countries, but in the UK, our education system is so rigid. Trying to change it is really challenging. And the schools that have the best luck are ones that are independent, or what we would call academies. So I think depending on how much flexibility and autonomy your schools have will determine how easy it is to adjust different processes. Oh, Joshua says, Sir, I like being called sir. Please, can dyslexia be hereditary? Absolutely. It runs in the family. All of the ones we spoke about, if your parent has dyslexia or autism, the likelihood that you have it is significantly higher. However, not guaranteed. You'll also find, though, that just because the child knows they're neurodivergent, the likelihood that their parent knows they're neurodivergent, a lot less. I don't think it's useful to go up to someone and say, hey, your child's dyslexic, I think you might be dyslexic, because we do not understand their understanding of dyslexia. They may view it as a bad thing. So they could be offended by us saying they may have it. But what we can do is saying this approach has worked for your child, maybe it could possibly work for you. So again, we're not trying to stigmatize anyone. We're being a lot more fluid with our language. Now, I want to open this up to all of you. And, if I've got any more time for questions, I will. But what future neurodiversity workshops would suit you best? I can't promise that I will definitely be able to do more in the future, but it's useful to know that either myself or the Africa Dyslexia Organisation can tailor content to really hit what you're looking for. So what would you still like to know more about? Are there areas where we've touched the tip of the iceberg, but you want to dive in a lot deeper? Now is a really good place to share that. And while you do that, I will read this question. I'm the head of HR in my organization. I like to know what are the low-cost, high-impact practices organizations can implement immediately to support neurodivergent staff. Oh, Dee Wang, you're really pushing me. Good question, though. I would say the easy things to do is to create universal adjustments. Look at your team, understand your team. What are the challenges that keep coming up time and time again? Rather than giving reasonable adjustments, so per person, try and do what I would call a baseline level of support. So the support is there for anyone, regardless of diagnosis or label. They just have the help. Things you can do is create an environment which there is quiet spaces, collaborative spaces, allow for people to have choice. I think choice is a really big one because when there isn't choice, people feel they have to disclose or have to say something. And that can make them feel quite isolated. So you've got people either feeling othered or shut off from others, or you've got people who stay quiet and can't be their authentic self. I find those approaches have much stronger positive impacts than just saying, all right, if you have dyslexia, here you go, because no one wants to be seen as the odd one out. Human beings like to kind of stay under the surface. And I think that's why those who are neurodivergent, who do have dyslexia, often don't even speak about it. Oh, nice. In terms of subjects, we got speech delay, more on accommodations, speech perfect. Oh, one more. Fine, D. I'll answer you. How should managers respond when performance expectation conflicts with neurodivergent working styles? Okay, that is a good one. And I honestly get this quite a lot. I think there's a few things. It's very easy to notice the neurodivergent individual as falling below expectations and saying, you're not a right fit for us. I think often people will look at training, coaching, or mentoring, but they forget the most important thing. And I would say resourcing. Have you given the person an appropriate task for them? Is there enough people to do it? The right amount of headcount, enough time to complete the task? Before focusing on the individual, focus on the organization as like the first kind of thing you should do. That helps a lot. The next thing is once you've had a one-to-one with an individual and found out what's working, what's not working, came up with some agreed adjustments, the next question would be, okay, how long do you need to implement it? Sometimes people say, okay, we've had the chat now. Why haven't you improved? People take time to improve. I would say best practice is normally like 3 months to see if an adjustment has really been implemented into their day-to-day work. And if it's not working, find another example. I remember I was struggling to read, so someone gave me some yellow paper. Okay, like that wasn't very helpful, but they thought just because they had done their side of the deal, doing some sort of adjustment, that they were going to see instantaneous results. That just isn't how our brains work. Now, to round things up, I would love to send you my details. If you are able to, here is my personal feedback form. I would love it if any of you can fill it out. Equally, if you think, I'd love to stay in touch with Nat, there's my email address and my LinkedIn. You're very welcome to stay in touch, and also my website. I've genuinely really enjoyed speaking with all of you, and the questions have been, honestly, I'm so impressed. This is also a really switched on group. And I am going to end my screen there, but if we do have further times for questions, I'm more than happy to answer a few extra. And I appreciate we probably got to give Martin a rest.
Thank you so much, Nat. That was a great presentation, and the way you were able to answer the questions that kept coming in was really great. I think our participants will be very happy with the presentation and the way that their questions have been answered. We do have a little bit more time if anybody wanted to unmute and ask a question, if you're able to. Happy to answer a few more, Nats. I know you've done a brilliant job.
By all means, please do. Keep them coming.
But if there's anyone who has any more burning questions that they want to ask, please raise your hand and then I can unmute you and you can ask Nat those questions. So just while we're waiting to see if anyone does have any questions, for me, some of the takeaways are we should focus on the observable needs rather than the diagnoses. I think that was definitely something that will stick in my mind after today's presentation. And I really did love the way you gave the definitions, especially with the imagery as well. I think it made it really easy to understand, even though many of us maybe have heard some of the definitions before. I found that the way you presented it really stuck with me. So thank you for that. And then the other thing that I found quite interesting is the differences in the sexes, as in when boys get diagnosed and when girls get diagnosed. So yeah, thank you so much for that. Do we have any hands up? I can't see any hands. Any more questions? Oh, hold on. I think there's some hands here. Hold on. Okay, so we'll start with Millicent. You have your hand raised. So you can unmute and ask your question. Millicent, are you able to unmute?
Yes, please. Hello.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. My question is, I have these students in my class, who is very good, as we said, orally. But when it comes to sitting down to write, that's the problem. And I realize that's the problem. And has persistent throughout the classes that has been through. Sometimes we try to help her to write. When you leave her for some time to attend to other students, then she stops. For about 3 or 4 exercises, will not take part in the whole class. Maybe one work that you can sit beside her to do, what she'll be able to do. But the rest, when you're not beside her, she can never. But the class is also large. How can we handle such a case? I know in Ghana there are some policies that are working in terms of writing the BEC. They are now making adaptation for people to do oral writing of the exams during exams. Exams are that's the BC, but what of those at the lower side before getting to the BC? To the child at this stage, how do we assess them doing the normal rating? Such a child who is finding it very difficult to write. When it comes to assessment, she or he may perform poorly, but orally the child must be good. So if they are doing it up there for the BC, at least there should be some adaptation in the schools to also help cater for such kids. This is what I just wanted to say. If there is other thing for us to also do to help, please, you can also help me with it. Thank you.
Oh, are you in class at the moment? Okay, so from what I understood, and I might have not understood the entire question, you have someone who is able to work when there's someone with them, but when they're not there, they just stop writing. And I don't know if you remember, but when I was talking about ADHD, I talked about something called body doubling. And that's having someone near you normally does help people work. Not for everyone, but for some individuals. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. In terms of why they may struggle, like I said, our brains are continuously absorbing lots of information all around us. And I like to kind of compare people to octopuses. Hear me out here. So imagine you've got like lots of different arms and they are all doing different tasks. So one arm might be looking at something, the other arm might be listening, the other one might be smelling. And if one of the arms isn't doing something, it will easily get distracted and find something else to do. So what you want to do is if you want someone to stay focused on one activity, for some individuals, mostly those with ADHD, you kind of want to stimulate those sensory needs. How that kind of looks in a real world practice is if I'm doing work in the day, I get really distracted. I start swirling on my chair. I've got lots of spinning toys that keep me busy. So I have to listen to music, and I will have to have kind of chatter or noise in the background. And it just keeps my mind kind of like rooted and anchored. So with this individual, maybe having kind of music in the background, maybe allowing them to have some spinning toys. I have a little Sonic toy here that I and it just kind of keeps my hands busy. And it means that if my brain is focused on some easy tasks, that it's not going to wander away when I'm trying to focus on some more difficult tasks.
Great, thank you for that response, Nat. So I'm going to take one more question from the hands raised, and then I'll go to a question in the chat. So Eric, you can unmute.
All right, thank you so much.
Eric, you can go ahead and ask your question.
All right, my question is, with the attention deficit, do we have certain food commodities they are not supposed to eat? And even regards to that disabilities, do we have certain food stuff which aren't good for them and contribute to their attention and hyperactive? And my second question is it possible to engage your presence in our school, because we are all inclusive in Ghana, Little Angels Academy. I think we are one of the schools with most of challenging students. We have them in numbers, and you'll be happy if you visit our school, and if there is possible, we allow you offer training for our facilitators if there's any way we should pass through to have engagement. Thank you.
Okay, so from my understanding, the two questions was, is there food you should or shouldn't eat if you have ADHD? And can I come to your school? It's a little bit far away, so maybe not, but if I'm ever around, I'll happily come by. As to kind of foods, yeah, foods that are like sugary are more likely to give people a short-term boost, and they're more likely to crash. In our brains, it's just chemicals inside our brains. When we talk about like drugs, people think, oh, that's really unnatural. Food is a drug because it releases chemicals into our brain. And the expression "you are what you eat" has a bit of truth in it. If you eat things that are like high in energy, you're going to be more energetic. But as I mentioned, how people with ADHD, they have the same amount of energy as the rest of us, but it's the distribution. So they might use up really quickly and then afterwards completely crash. So I would recommend having foods like carbohydrates, which release energy throughout the day, but in a much more consistent way. Another thing that's worth noting is with ADHD, the brain is always searching for a neurotransmitter, a chemical called dopamine. You might know dopamine as like a pleasure chemical. It does more than that, though. And things like kind of sugar or things that give you like a quick boost will give you dopamine. And those with ADHD are always looking for a dopamine boost. And that means they have a more addictive personality. So things like sugary foods, things like gambling, things like illegal drugs are going to be potentially much more dangerous for them. So I would say healthy eating and exercise is really important and makes a big difference. I don't want to, it sounds like a boring answer, but genuinely, eating healthy, exercise is probably the best thing you can do for ADHD. Medication is also an option, but I would say that's not accessible to everyone. It's not needed for everyone. And if you start taking it and then you stop taking it, sometimes that can be worse than not taking it at all. So yeah, stick with the basics and you should start seeing results.
Thank you. So I'm going to read just two of the questions that I've seen in the chat. So the first one is, what can be done to students who having neurodiversity issues in junior high school preparing for BECE? So I think with the UK equivalent, that's probably maybe
GCSEs?
year 9 and 10, or
Oh, okay.
yeah, am I correct? Yeah, so
I
yeah,
know,
probably
I appreciate that
GCSE.
because I was like, I
Yeah.
have no idea what that is. I just,
And the
well,
BECE
okay.
is the exams that they would sit, yeah.
First of all, I would correct the way you've written it, just because when you say, what can be done to students who are having neurodiversity issues, it doesn't make much sense because neurodiversity is just how the brain thinks. And I don't think the way they think is an issue. I think the issue is the systems that are currently in place and they don't work for that individual. So I would say, rather than treating them like they've done something wrong, look at the system and look what we can change. You're wanting to change the environment, not the individual. So that is probably my main advice for you. Don't look at individual adjustments, look at universal adjustments.
Thank you. So one more question from the chat, and then I'll take the two hands that are raised, Ahamada and Salim. So the one from the chat says, how can educators and trainers design learning environments that work for neurodivergent and neurotypical learners simultaneously?
Great question. And I fully support that. People often think, oh, if I have to make things inclusive for, say, those with dyslexia, it's going to double my workload. If you have to do that, you've already done it wrong. You want to do something that benefits everyone, or at very least doesn't disadvantage someone else. You might have noticed for my presentation, I used an interactive platform. And I did that not just because it's fun, but as an example of best practice for neurodivergent individuals. Some people like to verbally speak. Now, they might take up a lot of the kind of screen time or face-to-face time with the teacher. Other people are more introverted and they might prefer to write things. It doesn't matter how you like to express yourself. Your views and your opinions are important. So no matter how you teach students, make sure that they're able to contribute in a way that works for them. Either doing like a little emoji, verbally speaking, putting their hands up, writing questions later, sending questions in advance. Basically, can you give people options or multiple ways to have their say? And I would also extend that advice to how we examine people. Is there multiple ways we can examine someone? Does it always have to be written? Or are there other forms of intelligence that we value in the workplace? Because ultimately, we go to school to hopefully get a job later down the lines, but the way we teach people and the way people work, they aren't as closely as aligned as they should be if we are genuinely preparing young people for the future. Oh, Samantha, on pause, unmute.
Great, thank you, Nat. Okay, so question from the hands raised. Ali Ahamada, please, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much for accepting me to ask a question. So from Madagascar, my question is, when we talk about the neurodiversity or the neurodivergence, is it only shall we say that it is only medical affair? Is it only medical? And also, we as an educator, will we be able to provide support to a neurodivergent person, or it has to be only by doctor or only medical system?
Okay, so I think this is an important distinction. When we talk about neurodevelopmental conditions, they are medical. Only medical people can diagnose people, and they're just factually not very useful in real day-to-day life. If you go to an employer or a teacher and say, this person has attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, now the employer or the teacher might have a basic understanding of what that means, but they're not going to have a thorough understanding of it, and neither should they. That's not their job to be a medical professional. That's why I find using words like neurodivergent or to be much more beneficial, because you do not need a diagnosis to be neurodivergent. It's not a medical word. It's just a word which explains that your brain might think a little bit outside of what most people consider typical. And as a result, you can give adjustments or suggestions. If you research adjustments that typically work for someone with dyspraxia or dyslexia, they do not need a diagnosis in order for those adjustments to be useful. I don't technically have ADHD, but some of the adjustments that benefit people with ADHD, I really benefit from. And I find just another reason why relying so much on a medical term when we aren't medical individuals can be counterproductive.
Thank you, Nat. All right, so the last question from the chat box now, from Al Hassan, and it says, how do we safely communicate with a child's family about suspected cases of learning disability without igniting potential problems? Very often, families are in self-denial on such issues. Great question.
Yeah, I like this question a lot. And I think it comes down to the fact that whether or not something is seen as a positive or a negative is very much a generational thing. So 100 years ago, autism didn't exist. Then if you had autism, you were a witch, you will be burnt at the stake. Then you were insane and you went to an insane asylum. Before, it was considered schizophrenia. So depending on when you were born would determine on whether or not someone sees autism as a good thing, a neutral thing, or a deadly thing. And I think while we have come a long way, we still have similar challenges, even if they're not as pronounced. So dyslexia, some people see it as a superpower. Other people see it as neutral, just thinking differently. Some people see it as like being condemned to be a low achiever for the rest of your life. We can have our views, we can teach our perspectives, but we can't know whoever we're speaking to, we can't know other people's views and perspective. So always go into a conversation assuming that someone doesn't have any understanding. So let's say you see dyslexia as an advantage, as an innovative way of seeing the world. You might go up to a parent and say, I think your child has dyslexia, and you genuinely see that as a positive thing. However, you have no idea about that family's background or history, and they could see that as quite a personal attack, like you're insulting their family. So I wouldn't even mention it. I would say your child is doing really great in this, they're thriving in this, they're smashing at this. However, they are struggling in this area. I don't know if this is an area that you might personally struggle in as well. Are there any things that you have found helpful? So once again, you are focusing less on a label and more on the observational differences or challenges. And you try and look at something from a more three-dimensional approach, rather than just talking about the bottom spikes, about the area that someone has a deficit or a challenging. You're also acknowledging that, hey, these challenges are real, but how can we support you to overcome these challenges so we can really bring out the best of you and get those real high spikes? And I find that's much more empowering. We know being neurodivergent is hereditary, meaning it runs in the family, but it's not our job to be able to get like parents to go and get diagnosed. It's more to kind of spread empathy and understanding and how to get the best out of their child.
Nat, thank you so much. I'm sure this conversation it's not exhausted at all. Even with all the questions you've answered, the presentation you've done, definitely we have more questions, but for tonight's training, our time is almost spent. I just wanted to say thank you very much to our facilitator, Nat. Thank you to our interpreters, Josiah and Martin. And thank you to you as participants. Just to conclude, because there were some questions about additional help, support, training in your schools. So I just wanted to reiterate about Africa Dyslexia Organisation, what we do. So it's a Pan-African organisation working to ensure that people with dyslexia and related learning differences are not excluded from education, employment, or leadership opportunities. Now, our work sits at the intersection of education systems, workplaces, and policy. We focus on early identification, capacity building for educators and organizations, advocacy, research, and public awareness. Now, at ADO, we recognize that learning differences are not only an education issue. So when unsupported, they affect career pathways, workforce participation, and leadership. So our work is about creating systems that recognize and support people who learn differently across the lifespan. So at ADO, we are committed to connecting learning differences to education, employment, and leadership pathways. We are committed to advocacy and policy reform, including influencing ministries and labour bodies to embed things such as inclusive pedagogy into national frameworks. We also collaborate with schools, governments, and institutions to ensure that multisensory learning techniques are accessible and adaptable. And in addition to that, we also engage with employers and public sector partners to create inclusive pathways to decent work. So please do go on to africadyslexia.org if you want to read a bit more about what we do, if you want to get in touch, if you want to sign up as an advocate. Definitely someone will be able to tell you the best way to go about it. Thank you again to Nat. That was a brilliant presentation. Now, there is an after-training survey that we would really love for you all to complete. It really does help us know what other training we can offer, give feedback on what worked and what we could do differently. So if you check the chat, you'll see that there's a post from Africa Dyslexia Organisation saying, after training survey. Please do click on it and complete the forms for us. We would really appreciate that. And thank you so much. Just to say that the session has been recorded. So the recording and any resources that are relevant will be shared with you. So thank you very, very much. We're about to close. Nat, thank you. Our interpreters, thank you. And very importantly to our participants for being so engaging and asking so many questions. I know that I learned more today, so thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Samantha, and thanks again, everyone. I'm exhausted, but in the best way, so appreciate you all.
A good reason to be exhausted. Thank you.
Yeah.
We really appreciate you. We really do.